So just a brief background. This is my third year as a sustainability teaching fellow. And the first year I had the opportunity to work with Peter Buck in developing a music and sustainability course. And that was one of my first real plunges into these issues and how music can speak to these issues. And it was just wonderful. And then since then, I've been integrating that material into the music theory curriculum in various ways. And so the past 2 years, I've been working on the third semester core theory course. And it's a course that really gets into music analysis, musical meaning, musical form. And so it's the perfect vehicle to look at pieces and composers' approaches to issues of climate change and sustainability. So this course we're teaching this semester, we decided to use part of it as the module for the course coming up next year. So we have a little PowerPoint I'm going to pull up and some musical examples, and I'll let Tim begin here.
So the piece that I've been working on is the intersection between art and emotional connection, and how we can link objective data with subjective expression, which in the state of sustainability, we're looking at public awareness. We have this constant duality between the rational data and facts and the emotional feelings and connections that we have about those. And that intersection can drive a lot of decision making. But in a perfect world, rational data and rational thought would inform what we choose to pursue. But so many oftentimes our emotional connection and personal experience comes into conflict with that. And I was first inspired by looking at some work Rachel Carson did in the 50s and 1960s around the use of pesticides. So this was a time in the 40s when especially DDT, but other pesticides were being used, and they seemed to be kind of the new miracle chemical. They were solving problems such as spread of typhoid and malaria, as well as working with crops. And they seemed to be, for the first time in mankind's development, the point at which man could control nature, that we could, in effect, play the part of God ourselves and not have to exist within this the harmony of nature itself, but be able to really control it. It seemed like it was solving so many problems for us, and it was lauded and for between the 40s and the 50s was beginning to be used ubiquitously throughout the world, and seemed to be, without danger. At least that's what the public side of it was being pushed as. Now, Rachel Carson started noticing certain trends and certain things that were happening environmentally that she would later tie with the use of these pesticides. So she was tasked with the act of trying to turn this public data into narrative. There was a number of studies done in the 50s that were pointing towards the dangers pesticides were posing to the environment, such as lasting in water supply systems for several years, affecting biodiversity, getting into the bloodstream of animals and then into humans that consume those animals, and as well as the fact that they don't just kill pests, they kill most of all human life. And so the effects that they had, while positive at the outset to solve certain problems, pose some very stark realities for the future. Now, some of this data was being published in scientific journals as, here's what's happening, here's our trends over time, but they hadn't really been codified into a narrative that made its way to make an emotional connection with it that would influence any serious change, because this idea of man playing God and having this control over nature and solving so many problems had such a strong emotional connection that anything to divert away from that was met with a lot of resistance. And so Carson was tasked with, in order to really create public policy change, she had to create an emotional connection that was strong enough to overcome that feeling of playing God, in essence. So she was trying to find a way to craft this data into a narrative that would supersede what was, for the last decade, publicly lauded as an absolute miracle. One of the main points she looks at is the idea of if someone has humility and wonder, they really can't coexist with destruction. And making us curious and aware of the environments we live in, appreciation for and a connection with our environments, that connection will hopefully generate the necessary impetus to then find solutions that don't destroy it. Now, Carson had a literary background. She had ambitions of being a literary writer, and instead went into the sciences, but found in writing this work a way to weave her literary knowledge and ambitions into this to create quite a deep emotional connection with the audience. And so she opens this book not by listing a whole bunch of scientific facts and things as this is what's happening. Instead, she tells a story. And this first chapter of Fable for Tomorrow is a way to turn this into an emotional connection that makes the abstract data some sort of real thing that the audience can grasp onto. It starts idyllic with this painting of a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to be in harmony with its surroundings. She's constantly referencing the idea of harmony and how humankind has always lived in conjunction with the rest of nature, trying to counteract this narrative that had been proceeding as man now has superseded nature and is able to move the variables along. This idyllic town, wonderful autumns with the beautiful foliage, vibrant springs. People trek to it to listen to, the birds' migratory patterns as they pass through. But all of a sudden, this town, and in the fable she's telling, she says there's a strange blight creeps over the area, and goes on to say there's a shadow of death as the cattle no longer are birthing correctly. The next generation is not replenishing the previous, and there's a strange stillness as spring comes. Title of this book, Silent Spring, is referencing the fact that the birds are no longer singing. The birds that are there seem to have defects, aren't able to fly, and most birds aren't migrating through. It was a spring without voices, she says. And in this story, the public is looking for sources to mysterious changes that are happening. And she writes, no witchcraft, no enemy action had silenced the rebirth of new life in the stricken world. The people had done it themselves. Again, referencing the use of pesticides that have created over several years major impacts to the environment. A town that was once vibrant now left devoid of all those things that made it a tourist attraction or the things that economically made it stable. This picture she paints creates quite a stark reality and a deep emotional connection. One that, while it isn't true that there was one town at this point in time that had experienced all of these elements at once, these elements were experienced in different towns throughout America. And if we continued on the path we were going, this was going to be very much the reality for the rest of the world. And then from there, after this first chapter, telling the story, painting a narrative, she goes on to give the scientific data and facts and make the case for it, always weaving in narrative and creating this very much a shift in the emotional center of the ideas of the day. It was met with backlash, but 10 years later, it led to major policy reforms and the stopping of use of DDT in agricultural farming and things like that. A major achievement in the environmental sciences, and made largely through her ability to weave emotion and narrative into the transference of public data. Now, on the musical side, Stephen Stuckey, American composer, wrote in 2011 a piece to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the publication of this work. And for him, at this time, he didn't want to just translate the ideas from the 1960s and Carson's concerns around DDT and those, not try to find a way to make those scientific data points from the 60s into a music of today, but to find a way to create spiritual and psychological space for the present audience to unearth what their hopes, their fears, and their dreams are. He wanted to create a musical space that would open us up to our own emotion, things that music does best. And instead of trying to evoke, Carson's hopes and worries, he was trying to illuminate those of the individual themselves. And so he writes, music aspires to grant us access to our deepest emotional planes, to the region where, beyond our words and numbers, beyond theories and proofs, beyond the data points, the emotional plane where we live our fullest life. And this piece is an attempt then to, given the success that Carson had in following her emotional convictions, to open up space for us to be connected with the things that worry us today or in any day hereafter. You know, what are the anxieties to be worried about now? I want to play a brief clip from it. There's 4 movements. Each movement has titled based upon different aspects of Carson's work. This one is titled Silent Spring, and it references that idea of there's a vibrant society and community. It begins with buzzing with life, and that life gradually, as the piece continues on, diminishes until at the very end there's just one voice left that then dies away, symbolizing this kind of the rush and buzz of life, but then little by little, as this environmental dangers persist, and you'll hear these tolling of these chimes, little by little things enter into the environment that cause that energy to dissipate. And I'm just going to play a slice right from the middle, and that gives a little example of this, again trying to evoke the personal emotions to come forward and illuminate what is our personal hopes, fears, things to be worried about in the moment. So basically, that was just an example of how we can, today use those same aspects of, how art is able to evoke emotion, music especially dealing upon our individual emotions and illuminating our own hopes and fears that can translate into, kind of a model off of Carson's effect and things like that. And then Eric will go on to kind of share some other things he has.
Sure. Just very briefly, I'm going to be talking about a piece that does the inverse of what Tim's doing. It's a piece called Climate, composed in 2019 by Ian Walker, in conjunction with data scientists that collected data on temperature change, balance of the Earth, and carbon dioxide emissions. 3 data sets that were then correlated to tempo, pitch, and distortion. And the data starts, it starts in 1800, then continues to a projection in 2249. And so it crosses our point of existence, then continues on. And this starts in a period of balance in 1800, where the musical correspondent, it sounds very calm and luxurious, but then as these rates increase, becomes more distorted, more dissonant, faster tempo, and then crosses over the boundary. And actually it starts to sound a little bit like horror music, which creates a particular emotion. The amygdala, it activates that. There's been lots of studies on horror music, the amygdala, fight or flight. And so it creates a really strong emotional response. At a certain point, then it cuts off into 2 projections. One, if we curb emissions and return not to where we came from, but return to a safe level, and it follows that track, then it jumps to, if we don't, and ends in this really wild place in 2049. So it really creates a sense of, it's a closer correspondence between data and music than what Tim's doing. It really follows the data charts. And one of the things we're interested with the students and, the reaction between the two different pieces. So just briefly, that's what we have. So just to sum up, data plus emotion equals change.